The wind howled over the cliffs, tugging at the edges of the royal balcony as if the mountains themselves were trying to speak. Princess Lyanna clutched the stone railing, her heart pounding in time with the thunder rolling above the distant lake. She had always loved storms from afar, how they showed power without asking permission. But tonight, watching the clouds tear across the sky, she felt small, exposed, and strangely human in her fear. A sudden crack split the air. Lightning arced dangerously close to the palace tower, illuminating her blue eyes and the silver studs on her armor. Lyanna flinched, but she did not move back. She had to be brave as a princess, as a leader. And then she heard it. Lyanna, the voice was sharp, commanding, but beneath it an undercurrent of worry. It was human, that human. She turned sharply, her braid catching on the metal of her shoulder pad. Standing at the edge of the hallway, soaked from the rain that had begun to creep under the doors, was Jace. His brown hair plastered to his forehead, his uniform clinging to his frame, he looked utterly ridiculous and utterly heroic. "Why are you out here?" she shouted over the storm, trying to hide the flutter in her chest. "You could have been hurt." "I could say the same about you, Your Highness," Jace said, stepping closer. His voice was calm, steady, but there was something in it that made the hairs on her arms stand up. "This storm isn't going to wait for protocol." Lyanna's hands trembled on the railing. She wanted to scold him, to retreat behind her royal authority, but instead she froze. Because when he stepped closer, their eyes met, and in that instant the storm didn't matter. All she could hear was the rhythm of his breathing, the subtle shift of his stance, the quiet certainty that he would not let her fall. "You're reckless," she said, though her voice wavered. She wanted to sound angry, to sound distant, but a blush crept across her cheeks. She knew it, hated it, but could not stop it. "And you're beautiful even when you're scared," Jace said softly, leaning just enough to shield her from the wind with his body. Lyanna froze, her lips parting slightly. Did he really just say that? She had faced war councils, betrayal, and assassination threats. She had stared down the fiercest of her people's doubts. And yet in that moment she felt like a child, caught off guard, vulnerable, and completely exposed. I am a princess," she stammered, trying to regain her composure. "I don't." Jace smiled faintly, shaking his head. "No, you're more than that, and you don't have to pretend here." The wind tugged harder at her cloak, and she nearly stumbled. Jace's hands shot out instinctively, gripping her elbows with gentle strength. His thumbs brushed her armored shoulders, and the contact sent a shiver up her spine. Her heart raced faster than the storm itself. "Sweetie," Jace said, almost too casually, as if the world hadn't just thrown a bolt of lightning at them both. Lyanna's eyes widened. Did he just call me that? Her face burned hotter than the flash of lightning above. She wanted to step back, to assert herself, to remind him of rank and duty. But all she could do was look at him, frozen, her breath caught somewhere between awe and embarrassment. The storm raged around them, but for a heartbeat, the world narrowed. There was only the human and the princess, and a word that had never been spoken aloud between them before. Then the wind tore her cloak from her shoulders, and she finally moved, spinning around to catch it. When she turned back, Jace was watching her, that same calm determination in his eyes and the faintest curve of a smile. "Lyanna," he began, but the word hung unfinished, lost to the storm. She realized with a strange mix of fear and wonder that whatever was coming next, the councils, the threats, the war brewing on distant planets, it didn't matter. Because she had felt something she had never felt before, and it terrified her. Lightning struck again, and the balcony seemed to tremble beneath them. But this time, Lyanna did not feel small. She felt alive and dangerously, wonderfully human. And she could not stop thinking about that single, casual word, sweetie. The morning after the storm, the palace was eerily quiet. Rain still dripped from the carved eaves, forming small puddles on the marble floors. Princess Lyanna walked through the halls, her mind tangled in the memory of Jace's words. Sweetie. She still felt the warmth of it, burning behind her royal composure, and she hated herself a little for it. She tried to focus on the pressing matters of the day, the council of nobles, the looming threat from the neighboring system, and the endless etiquette expected of a princess. But every glance out of the tall windows reminded her of the stormy night, and of the human who had dared to speak to her with such ease. "Your Highness," a voice called. Lyanna turned sharply to see her advisor, Lord Ceylan, bowing stiffly. "The Council awaits. They are concerned about the border forces and about recent reports of human involvement on our planet." Lyanna's pulse quickened. Humans were technically forbidden from influencing political decisions in her system. Their presence was tolerated for trade and study, but never for diplomacy. Yet Jace had clearly stepped across that line. "I will join them shortly," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Tell me, what did the reports say?" Ceylan hesitated. "That humans have been assisting our frontier guards, repairing ships, training troops, and possibly sharing tactical knowledge." Lyanna's heart sank. Jace had done all of that, risked everything, and now, if discovered, he could be expelled or worse. "I see," she said, masking her concern. "Prepare the council. I will not waste time." As she moved toward the council chamber, her thoughts kept returning to Jace. He had saved lives without hesitation, yet he had done it without regard for rank or protocol. There was a bravery in him that humans seemed to possess in abundance, a raw courage that her people often lacked. She had always been taught to admire discipline and caution, but humans were different, bold, unpredictable, and undeniably alive. When she entered the chamber, the nobles rose immediately. Their faces were sharp, their eyes calculating. They had never seen her hesitate. "Your Highness," one noble began, "we must discuss the human interference on our borders. It threatens our authority and could destabilize our alliances." Lyanna's gaze shifted, scanning the room until it found a small, hidden alcove near the entrance. A shadow moved there, quiet, patient. Jace. How had he managed to follow her here, and why had he not been stopped by the guards? Before the nobles could press further, Lyanna's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "I am aware of the humans' involvement," she said. The council froze. "And I will not condemn them without reason. Some of our soldiers owe their lives to their courage." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. One of the older nobles sneered. "Princess, you speak as if their loyalty outweighs their breach of protocol." Lyanna's blue eyes flashed. "I speak as one who has seen lives saved because of courage, not fear, not titles, courage." She paused, letting the words settle. "If that is a threat to our authority, then perhaps our authority needs reevaluation." The chamber fell silent. None dared contradict her, all except one, the youngest noble who had the nerve to lean forward. "And what of the human named Jace? Does he too hold some title in your council?" Lyanna's pulse quickened. She could not reveal her feelings, not to these people. But she also could not betray him. She drew in a slow breath and said, "He holds the title of friend to our people. That is enough." Outside the chamber, hidden behind a column, Jace exhaled softly. Friend. She had called him that. And yet there was something more unspoken, a bond that went beyond politics, beyond protocol. He felt it too, the pull between them that neither rank nor tradition could sever. The council meeting ended, but Lyanna could not shake the tension. She had just made a choice that could have consequences for her throne, for her people, and for herself. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that she had also made a choice for Jace. When she finally left the chamber, she found him waiting in the quiet corridor, leaning casually against the wall, but alert, as if he had known she would come to him. "Are you trying to get me in trouble?" she asked, though her voice had softened. He smiled faintly, only a little. Lyanna felt her cheeks warm again. Why did he have to be so human, she thought. "You risk everything for me, for my people. Why?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Jace said simply. "And because I care about you." Her breath caught. The word echoed in her mind, louder than any thunder from the storm. Care. Lyanna realized she had spent her life following rules, performing duties, wearing masks of politeness and power. And yet here was a human, fearless and untamed, making her feel something she had never allowed herself to feel. Vulnerable, alive, desired. And terrifyingly happy. Night fell like a velvet curtain over the palace, the mountains silhouetted against a pale silver moon. Inside, the corridors were silent except for the soft echo of Lyanna's footsteps. She had not slept since the council meeting. Her mind replayed Jace's words, the warmth of his hand on her shoulder, the way he had called her friend. Her heart ached with confusion. She was a princess, bound by duty and expectation. And yet, she felt drawn to him in a way that no law, no etiquette, no fear of scandal could suppress. A sudden noise made her pause, a faint metallic clink almost imperceptible. Lyanna stiffened, her hand resting on the hilt of her dagger beneath her cloak. "Lyanna," a whisper came from the shadows. She spun, heart racing, and found Jace emerging from the corridor's darkness, his expression tense, eyes scanning the hall. "They're here," he said quietly. "I detected movement near the west wing. Unregistered personnel, could be mercenaries or worse." Lyanna's blood ran cold. The human had noticed what the palace guards had missed. She had always thought humans clumsy, fragile, but here he was, alert and precise, reading the shadows like an open book. "Should we?" she began, but he shook his head. "Not yet, we wait, we observe, they underestimate humans." Her stomach fluttered. Underestimate him or me, she wondered. Together they moved silently through the corridors, shadows among shadows. Lyanna realized how natural it felt to follow him, to trust him. Every instinct she had learned as a princess, every lesson in caution and control, was being rewritten by a human beside her. They reached the west wing and crouched behind a column. Jace's fingers brushed hers as he pointed toward a door slightly ajar. Inside, two figures were rifling through scrolls and data crystals. Lyanna recognized the insignia immediately. Mercenaries from the rival system, sent to steal intelligence about her planet's defenses. Her hands shook, not with fear but anticipation. Jace looked at her, eyes questioning. She nodded imperceptibly. Together they sprang into action. The attack was swift. Jace moved first, his human reflexes faster than any palace guard could match. One mercenary went down before he even realized what happened. Lyanna followed, her dagger flashing silver in the moonlight. Her movements were precise, controlled, deadly, a perfect blend of royal training and adrenaline. By the time the last intruder hit the ground, the hall was silent again. Lyanna's chest heaved, her hair damp from sweat and exertion. She looked at Jace, expecting exhaustion, but found him smiling faintly, calm and unshaken. "You saved me," she said, her voice trembling. "No," he corrected gently. "We saved each other." Her lips parted, her heart hammering in a rhythm that had nothing to do with fear. The intensity of the moment, the danger, the adrenaline, the closeness, made her feel alive in a way she had never known. And then he said it again, quietly, almost teasingly, but with undeniable sincerity. "Sweetie." Lyanna froze, her entire being aflame. How could a single word make her pulse race, her cheeks burn, her stomach twist? She wanted to protest, to hide, to scold, but no words came. Her gaze met his, and the blush she thought she could never control deepened, unstoppable. For a moment the world narrowed to the two of them. No palace, no politics, no war. Just Lyanna and Jace, and the raw, terrifying beauty of human courage and warmth. "Jace," she whispered, barely audible. He stepped closer, just close enough for her to feel the heat of his presence without breaking protocol entirely. "Lyanna," he said, voice low and steady, "I've never felt anything like this. I don't know what comes next, but I do know I can't leave you." Her throat tightened. She had always believed a princess must be untouchable, unmoved, precise. And yet here was a human who made her feel everything she had buried under duty and tradition. The sound of footsteps in the distance snapped them back to reality. She straightened, shaking off the moment, but the memory lingered, burned into her mind. "We need to move," Jace said. "The palace guards will investigate soon, and the mercenaries may have allies. This isn't over." Lyanna nodded, but inside, a new realization took root. She could hide from politics, from responsibility, even from herself, but she could not hide from this feeling. And for the first time, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. That maybe, just maybe, humans, this human, could teach her how to be free, how to be brave, and how to love without fear. As they disappeared into the night, shadows swallowing them, Lyanna couldn't stop thinking about the word that had undone her composure. The word that made her heart beat faster than the storm ever could. Sweetie. And she knew with terrifying clarity that it was only the beginning. The palace felt colder than usual the next morning. Mist hung low over the lake, and the mountains loomed like silent watchers. Princess Lyanna walked briskly through the halls, her thoughts still tangled with Jace's presence and the night's danger. Every shadow seemed suspicious, every whisper potentially a warning. When she entered the council chamber, it was immediately clear that today would not be ordinary. The nobles were gathered in full, their faces grim, their hands clenched around scrolls and data crystals. Lyanna could feel the tension pressing against her like a physical weight. "Your Highness," Lord Salen said gravely, "our intelligence confirms that the mercenaries were only scouts. Their masters are closer than we thought, inside the council itself." Lyanna froze, betrayal within her own ranks. She had known the risk, but hearing it aloud made her stomach twist. "Who?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the rising panic. Salen hesitated. "We are still verifying, but there are signs pointing to Lord Valan and his faction." The chamber erupted in murmurs. Valan, the most influential noble outside the royal family, notorious for his cunning, had been quietly undermining the throne for years. Lyanna's mind raced. If Valan acted openly, the humans' involvement would become a liability. And worse, Jace could be caught in the crossfire. She made a decision. "We meet tonight," she said firmly. "I want all council members present. No one leaves. We settle this before it spreads." Salen's eyebrows rose. "Your Highness, that is dangerous," confronting Valan directly. "I am aware," Lyanna interrupted, "but danger has never stopped me, and it will not stop me now." Later, in the quiet of her private chambers, Lyanna found Jace waiting. He had anticipated her movements again, his human intuition uncanny. "You look tired," he said softly. "I am," she admitted, "and we have no room for mistakes. Tonight the council will learn who truly threatens this palace." Jace's eyes met hers, steady and unyielding. "Then we won't let them win." Lyanna's heart caught at the simplicity and power of his words. Humans fought differently than her people. They relied not on titles, but on courage and instinct. And with him by her side, she felt she could face anything. Night fell and the council chamber was thick with unease. Valan arrived last, his presence commanding and smug. He bowed to her, but his eyes gleamed with malice. "Your Highness," he said smoothly, "I trust the palace is well." Lyanna's gaze was icy. "I trust that truth will not hide behind courtesy tonight, Lord Valan." The discussion began formally, but it quickly escalated. Accusations were thrown, voices rose, and Valan's faction pressed for dismissal of all human involvement. Lyanna's pulse raced, but she held her ground, her blue eyes sharp as a blade. Then she signaled Jace. He stepped forward calmly, holding evidence they had gathered from the mercenary scouts, messages, maps, and coded transmissions. "These," he said plainly, "show your faction's coordination with outside forces. Your plans risk the safety of the entire system." The room went silent. Even Valan's allies faltered. Valan's voice was low, furious. "How did you?" "Humans," Lyanna said quietly, almost to herself. "We see things others cannot." Jace glanced at her, and she felt a surge of warmth. His words were human, simple, undeniable, but together they carried the weight of authority, courage, and truth. The council could not ignore the evidence. One by one, Valan's supporters fell silent or fled. The princess's boldness, combined with human ingenuity, had turned the tide. As the chamber emptied, Lyanna felt the exhaustion of leadership settle on her shoulders. She turned to Jace, who had stayed close, quiet, and watchful. "You risked yourself for this," she said, her voice low, trembling with gratitude. He shrugged, though his eyes were intense. "I risk myself every time I'm near you, but I wouldn't change it, not for anything." Her cheeks burned. She wanted to step back to hide, but she didn't. Instead, she let herself look at him fully, openly, vulnerable, human, alive. "Sweetie," he said again, almost as if testing her, almost teasing, almost daring. Lyanna's breath caught, and for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to smile freely. The blush that crept across her face was unstoppable, alive, and unashamed. The storm of politics, betrayal, and danger had not ended, but in that moment she realized something. She did not have to face it alone. And as the night sky stretched above them, dotted with distant stars, Lyanna knew the truth of what humans brought. Not just courage, not just ingenuity, but the power to make her heart feel, to make her believe, and to make her fight for something more than duty. The first rays of dawn barely touched the peaks when Lyanna stood at the cliff edge overlooking the sparkling blue lake. The air was crisp, sharp, and carried the faint scent of snow from the distant mountains. Her heart thudded, not from the chill, but from the knowledge that danger had not vanished. Jace was beside her, silent, watching the horizon. He had slept little if at all, but his brown eyes were sharp, alert, unwavering. He had insisted on accompanying her despite her protests, and she had not dared refuse. "They know we've exposed them," Lyanna said quietly, her hands gripping the railing. "Valan won't sit idle, he'll strike back and soon." Jace nodded. "I expected that, but they underestimate humans and us together." Lyanna's chest tightened. Together. The word carried a weight she was only beginning to understand. They were allies, yes, but more than that, they had become entwined in a bond forged not by politics, but by trust, courage, and raw human emotion. A sudden tremor ran through the balcony, startling her. She glanced down. Rocks had shifted, tiny avalanches of snow sliding into the lake below. But then she noticed movement across the water, sleek shadowed vessels gliding toward the palace docks. "They're coming," Jay said, his voice calm but urgent. "Mercenaries, reinforcements." Lyanna's mind raced. The palace guards would be overwhelmed. The council had been shaken, but their true enemies were here now, and she realized there would be no time for diplomacy. "Then we fight," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "We fight or the palace falls." Jace glanced at her and she felt it again, the pull, the undeniable human courage that radiated from him. "And we do it together," he said. Within moments, the palace was alive with motion. Guards scrambled to their positions, archers lined the walls, and Lyanna donned her armor fully, the turquoise-studded necklace catching the pale sunlight. Every piece of silver reflected her resolve. She felt the weight of duty settle on her shoulders, but beneath it something entirely new, a spark of hope. The first wave of mercenaries hit the gates. They were fast, trained, and vicious, but Jace moved like a force of nature. He dodged, countered, and led small squads of humans and palace guards with an ingenuity no one expected. Lyanna fought beside him, her dagger slicing through the chaos, her mind sharp, her reflexes honed by fear and adrenaline. And yet it wasn't just skill that made them unstoppable. It was trust. Every glance between them, every shared movement was a conversation without words. When Jace called her sweetie in the heat of battle, her cheeks flamed despite the chaos. But it grounded her, reminded her of the bond that gave her courage beyond the royal training she had always relied on. They fought through the palace halls, past shattered doors and overturned tables, each victory bringing them closer to the inner sanctum. But the final confrontation awaited. Lord Valan himself had taken command of the attackers. He emerged from the shadows, his presence cold, calculating, deadly. "Princess," he sneered, "you fought well, but courage alone will not save you." Lyanna squared her shoulders. "No, but humans help." She glanced at Jace. He smiled faintly, a spark of daring in his eyes, and together they charged. The battle was brutal. Valan's skill was formidable, but he had not anticipated the unpredictable strategy, intuition, and boldness of a human fighting for someone he cared for. Jace moved like a whirlwind, and Lyanna followed, her strikes precise, her mind clear. Every time she faltered, his presence steadied her. Every time he hesitated, her courage pulled him forward. Finally, Valan stumbled, caught off guard by a combined move neither of them had planned verbally, only instinctively. Lyanna's dagger found its mark, and he fell, defeated but alive, his fury etched across his face. Silence fell over the palace. The mercenaries fled, leaderless, broken. Guards cheered, but Lyanna barely heard them. Her eyes were on Jace. He was breathing heavily, his uniform torn, a smear of blood on his cheek, yet he grinned at her almost teasingly. You did it," she whispered, disbelief and awe mixing in her voice. "We did it," he corrected gently, "together." Her heart ached, a rush of emotion she could not name. pride, relief, gratitude, and something deeper, something more dangerous. She reached for his hand, and for the first time she did not hesitate. "Sweetie," he said again, almost softly, almost as if testing her. And she laughed, a clear, unrestrained sound, the first in days. The blush on her cheeks was unstoppable, a living flame. "Jace," she whispered, "I." He pressed a hand gently to her cheek, stopping her words, and for a heartbeat there was nothing but the two of them. Alive, human, fearless, and undeniably connected. The palace had been saved, the council shaken but loyal. But more importantly, Lyanna realized something she had never known. Courage was contagious. Humanity, its warmth, its fearlessness, its love, could teach even a princess to fight, to feel, to live. And with Jace by her side, there was nothing she could not face. The palace was quiet again, but the calm felt fragile, like a thin sheet of ice over a stormy lake. Princess Lyanna sat in her chambers, the turquoise-studded necklace still warm against her chest. The events of the night replayed in her mind, the mercenaries, the battle, Jace's unwavering courage. Her body ached from exertion, but her heart ached in a different way. Jace entered quietly, his uniform tattered, a faint bruise on his jaw, but his eyes bright and alert. He carried a small satchel, filled with reports from the scouts and the council's records. He set it down beside her and sat carefully, leaving space for her to breathe. "You're tired," she said softly. Her voice held concern, but also something more vulnerable, something she had never allowed herself to express before. "I'm fine," he replied, though she could see the tension in his jaw. "Humans, well, we don't rest until the problem is solved." Lyanna shook her head with a small smile. "You never cease to amaze me. You run into danger without hesitation, without fear." He looked at her, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink around them. "Fear is natural," he said quietly. "It's what you do with it that matters." Her breath caught. What I do with it. She had spent her life fearing failure, fearing loss, fearing the judgment of others. And yet beside Jace she felt fearless. Not because the danger had vanished, but because he had shown her what courage truly looked like. Human courage, raw, unpolished, and fiercely alive. "You're incredible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She wanted to say more, to reveal the blush she could no longer hide, the feelings that burned hotter than any battle. But she could not find the words. Jace leaned closer, his eyes soft but intense. "Lyanna, you don't have to hide, not from me." Her heart thundered. She felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire of the battle. She wanted to step closer, to reach out, but she hesitated, caught between duty and desire. She began, then stopped. Her fingers brushed his hand unconsciously. The contact sent a shiver through her, and she realized she no longer cared about propriety or rank. All that mattered was the man beside her, the human who had saved her life, who had stood with her when others had faltered, who had dared to call her sweetie in the storm. He smiled faintly, sensing her struggle. "It's okay," he said gently. "You don't have to say it, I can feel it." Tears pricked her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming release of all the tension, fear, and restraint she had carried. She had lived under expectations her entire life, always performing, always cautious. And here was a human who taught her that it was okay to feel, to trust, to care openly. "You're everything I never knew I needed," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to explain, how to—" "Then don't," Jace said softly, tilting her chin gently so their eyes met. "Let it be enough that we're here together." Lyanna felt her knees weaken slightly, her breath caught, her blush spreading like wildfire across her cheeks. The world outside the palace, the politics, the threats, the mountain storms faded into insignificance. In that room there was only them and the undeniable bond that had grown through fire, fear, and courage. And then, almost instinctively, she whispered the word back to him, trembling but full of sincerity. "Sweetie." Jace's grin widened, soft and triumphant. "Finally," he said, and for the first time there was no teasing, no tension, only the quiet, powerful understanding between them. The storm outside began again, wind whipping against the palace walls. But this time Lyanna did not flinch. She did not feel small. She felt alive, fully and completely, because humans, this human, had shown her the strength in vulnerability, the courage in love, and the power in simply being herself. The palace had survived the mercenaries. The council had survived Veyland's schemes. But more importantly, Lyanna had survived herself and discovered a courage that no title, no throne, and no expectation could ever take away. And as Jace's hand held hers, steady and warm, she knew that whatever storms were coming, whether of politics, war, or fate, she would not face them alone. Humans had changed her world, and in their humanity she had found something eternal. The first light of dawn crept over the snow-capped peaks, turning the lake into a mirror of molten gold. Princess Lyanna stood at the highest balcony of the palace, her braid catching the wind, her armor gleaming in the early sunlight. Beside her, Jace stood silently, his hand brushing hers just enough to steady her without breaking protocol, or so it seemed. The palace had survived the mercenaries. Veyland's treachery had been exposed, and his faction was in disarray. The council now looked to Lyanna not only as a princess, but as a leader who could make impossible choices, who could wield courage alongside wisdom. And through it all, a human had been at her side, not as a soldier, not as a tool, but as a companion, a friend, a confidant, a force that reshaped her understanding of strength. "You did it," Lyanna whispered almost to herself, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "We did it." Jace's grin was soft, but it carried the weight of every night spent in danger, every risk taken. "Together," he said simply. Her gaze met his. She felt the lingering warmth of his words, the truth behind the teasing, the sincerity behind the casual sweetie. That word had become more than a word. It was trust, it was courage, it was human. Lyanna turned fully toward him, her blue eyes reflecting both the rising sun and the unspoken intensity between them. "I never knew," she began, hesitating, a blush climbing her cheeks. "I never knew humans could change everything, not just with their hands, but with their hearts." Jace's hand found hers completely now, fingers intertwining naturally. "We do more than survive," he said. "We fight, we feel, we change the world around us, and sometimes we change the people around us too." Lyanna's chest tightened. All the lessons she had learned, all the expectations of royalty melted away in that moment. She could feel herself, her courage, her heart, her fear, her longing, and she could feel him beside her, unafraid of all of it. "Sweetie," he said again, softer this time, almost reverent, almost protective. The blush that had haunted her from the first time he spoke the word returned, but now it was accompanied by a warmth, a joy, and a deep, unshakable trust. She smiled, a smile that was both shy and triumphant, and said it back. "Jace, sweetie." The moment stretched, fragile yet unbreakable. Around them the palace stirred. Guards resumed their patrols, the council prepared to rebuild. And outside the world awaited, but Lyanna no longer felt small in it. She felt alive. She felt human. She felt limitless. Jace leaned slightly closer, a playful spark in his eyes, but also a quiet respect. "You know," he said, "I never expected to end up here with a princess, fighting for her kingdom, protecting her people, and somehow being allowed to call her sweetie." Lyanna laughed softly, the sound like bells in the crisp morning air. "And I never expected to let a human teach me how to be brave, how to fight, how to feel." For a long moment they stood together, watching the sun rise higher, painting the mountains in gold and silver. The war was not over, the universe remained uncertain, but they had survived. And in surviving, they had discovered something rarer than victory, rarer than crowns or armies: the courage to trust, to love, and to be fully alive. "Whatever comes next," Lyanna said, her voice steady, her eyes bright, "we face it together." "Together," Jace agreed, squeezing her hand gently. And as the wind danced over the cliffs and the lake sparkled beneath the morning sky, Princess Lyanna allowed herself to feel the truth she had never dared admit. That humans, this human, had changed her world forever. Not through power, not through rank, but through heart, through courage, and through love. The storm had passed, the palace had endured, and for the first time in her life, Lyanna did not feel like a princess bound by rules. She felt like a human, alive, fearless, and utterly, beautifully free.